I wasn't real sure when Tom Oakley called me and said, do you really want a couple of engineers to talk at this? You know, we can get kind of nerdy. And he said, keep it simple. The organization that I've been involved with, UMIMRA was actually organized in 1954 after the locks and dams were built. Most of the levees that we have here in the tri-state area were built between 1880 and 1920, and very supportive, of course, navigation improvements. That's when we had a 6-foot channel, and Congress said, hey, we need a 9-foot channel to really move products. But when we put the 9-foot channel, it raised water elevations. So our organization from 3 states, Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa, was basically agricultural interests, said, hey, we support these improvements, but you raise water against these levees. It stopped some of the natural gravity drainage, and we need levee improvements. So it resulted in the 1954 Flood Control Act. I want to talk a little bit about things that happened here in 93. This is Senator Paul Simon, who came to visit our area and said, hey, you know, this is right before the 93 flood. We said, we've got a real problem. We've been seeing these flood events in 73. We've got 2 lower levees, and was very concerned early in 93. Unfortunately, you know, we were right. These levees were too low. This is a Lima district. It flooded in that summer. We got the dates here on top. This is Indian Grave Levee District. We had the National Guard very involved in the flood fighting in this area. We had the north end, we had the south end, both of those failed. So this is the condition that we had levees that as a result of the 1954 Flood Control Act, and obviously was not meeting the needs of today. This is a hydrograph, and you can kind of see, I'm not going to go through this, but you can kind of see how these flood events, this is actually at Bungee Elevator, but you know, as the water gets high enough and overtops one of our levees, it drops down just temporarily and goes right back up because we had so much water in 93 that we had to deal with. This basically, people saw this around the world. This is West Quincy. I was involved with the Don Bauman from Rock Island District to put Jimmy Scott in jail for life for creating this disaster. This was one levee that should not have failed. The crest had already passed Quincy at that time. We had a very good flood protection system set up as far as temporary flood control improvements, and a few levees, sandbags were pulled and created this disaster. And this really kind of kicked off, as Chuck Schultz mentioned, the Tri-State Summit. This is really bringing everybody together that we've got to work. Of course, the Quincy flood quickly dropped, and it wasn't too long before the water came back and flooded the upper district of the Snai. It was flooded north of Bungee Elevator. This is an area that I was very concerned about, and certainly, you know, tremendous amount of damage, 2 major railroads, and we were just at that time getting the interstate system. So these levee systems, and that's why one of the key messages I have, without flood control, nothing else matters. This protects our railroads, it protects our transportation. We had no way to cross for over 200 miles the Mississippi River. Another hydrograph showing how the water comes in and it quickly drops down. I'm not going to go through these very quickly. This is, unfortunately, after the 93 flood, we did get a lot of attention and we had a comprehensive plan started, but it got tied up with kind of a dysfunctional Congress at the time. They did not move forward and improve the planning process, and we did not have a plan in 2008. This is actually the flood of 2008 at Burlington, Iowa, and you can see the new Burlington Bridge. Right now we have funding hopefully for part of 34 that will be connecting, 34 4-lane highway that will be connecting across, but it doesn't do any good if we don't have adequate flood protection. And Henderson County 1 and 2, which you see underwater, is a district that has not yet been improved to 100-year, and it's going to cost the state of Illinois about $50 million more to elevate that highway than if it would just improve the levee system. So we have a lot of things to work out to make sure we don't have the kind of disasters that we have in the future. This is Hunt Lima, the same flood event, 2008. We just at this one location, it was $23 million. The failure first occurred in Hunt Lima District. And the total damage in 2008 approached what we had in '93 of $15 billion. So actually, in today's dollars, we're looking at another flood event like these two would be close to $30 billion of total damage. So we need to be smart and make sure these things don't happen again. This is my farm, and my hair's starting to turn gray. If you saw that first picture, my hair was dark. And we're trying to get things through for a comprehensive plan. Again, just this year, we've been hit with another flood event. This is at Gregory, where we had an overtopping failure. And one thing you don't want is an overtopping failure with the sand levee, and that's what we've been occurring. You can see the kind of damage that occurs. And this is technically not supposed to happen. The original 1954 Flood Control Act was based on the flood of record in 1947. It was and they made them 3 to 4 feet. But the difference from 1947 to the flood events we see today is about 7.5 feet. This is Hunt-Lima District. We were kind of fortunate. We had good flood fighting, and we did not fully, we're getting smarter with some of our flood fighting, but again, this was a district that tried to get improvements through the 408 process with the Corps, was unable to get the levee improvements that we needed under the current system, and had to flood fight again. But fortunately, we had water coming in at the low end of the district. Kind of sounded like Niagara Falls. We had quite a bit, they had 13 boats running to put sandbags, but we actually let water run over for a period of time to try to help on that crest. So if you look at the greatest floods of record, it's kind of interesting that the top 3 is that 93, this year, and 2008. And all of them have happened since 1973, when our organization pointed out to the Corps of Engineers, hey, there's something wrong with the 1954 Flood Control Act. It's not really meeting our needs. So this is the difference. The 1954 Flood Control Act that we're currently living under, the flood of record, it was designed from 1947. They added 3 to 4 feet of freeboard, thinking, hey, we're going to be in good shape. The people that lived along the valley at that time said, hey, this is pretty good, but it quickly found out that it was totally inadequate for what we're seeing today. About 7.5 foot difference from these flood events. So I want to talk about what's really happening. We're seeing, this is kind of the flood data from the Illinois State Water Survey, but in a very short period of time, the red line is 11-year running average. It dropped down between 1880 and 1920 of a very moderate, dropped 10 inches of average rainfall down to about 33, 32 inches of rainfall a year. But now we're heading back up, and that's what the concern is. Our systems were designed in the 30s and 40s that don't handle it. The USGS just did a study a few years ago and looked at the entire United States. These are 200 kilometer square grid that you see across the 48 continental states. And the only area that we've seen significant increases from the base flood from 1940 to basically today in frequency, in the peak magnitude, in the volume, and the number of high water events is in our area, basically from Rock Island down to Cape Girardeau. There's a lot of places in the country that's actually seen a decrease in the amount of rainfall. So we're seeing a huge change. So there's a lot of studies that's been done, but very little action. So what we're working on right now is to actually see if we can't get legislation in place. There's 118 million acres of water in the watershed of the Upper Mississippi, but only 1 million basically has any levees behind it. So you don't have much storage capacity in the bottom area, and that's some of course, protecting our bridges, protecting our railroads, and provides our navigation system. So it needs to be more in the upland areas, what we're trying to point out here. So we had a study that was done in 2011 showing the systemic flood control plan that would allow most of the levees to improve to a 500-year. In the lower 5 states, they've had a plan in place since 1928. They basically have a 700-year design. So we feel the upper 5 states should have something very similar to the lower states. There's new things out there that were not available to us in '99. And one of those is a funding mechanism that the Corps has, very similar to what the EPA has, that would allow funding for these levee districts over a 35-year period at basically Treasury rates. They have 5 years to build it, 5 years before a payment's due. Those types of programs are not available for these low interest loans. And also, the other thing that's out there is a public-private partnership. So we're going to be looking at both of those. We hope to have this in a worded bill. We'll be getting that out to everybody once we have a bill number to provide support so that we can actually see these levee improvements. So in summary, we don't want to have another disaster. And we are asking for the Mississippi River Commission, who oversees the lower 5 states, to have the ability to oversee the upper states. This isn't the presentation I was actually going to make today, but it gets go through the flood control issues. I do want to mention briefly that the other big issue we're working on is Quincy Bay. It looks something that Quincy Park District, the City of Quincy, the boat clubs, a lot of other groups have been interested. We formed QBERA, Quincy Bay Area Restoration Enhancement Area, in 2010. We just got noted last year from the Corps that we think we might be eligible for about a $20 million project to restore Quincy Bay. And the last thing I just want to mention is the importance of our riverfront. And our city and county here in Quincy is looking right now at starting a study to see if we can't also have access to these river boats. Right now, both Viking Cruise Line and some of the other Mississippi cruises are updating their boats because they're seeing a demand for more tourists on the Mississippi River. And as a tri-state, we want to be prepared for it. So thank you very much.